Thanks, team. Well, happy Thursday. Are we hanging in? Yeah? I'm excited to be with you guys this morning. Today, I did not pay attention to what everybody was eating. Whoa, was that me? Or was that you guys? I don't know. The power generator is going out. We're aware. But I didn't pay attention to what you guys were eating. But I was on the train yesterday, and a few seats down, I didn't have any context for this, but I heard a dad say to his kid, a train is the same as a plane, just less wings. Less wings, not no wings, just less wings. So dads, you just keep making stuff up. They believe it. So good. Just say it with confidence. It's half of parenting is feigned confidence. I appreciated Jeremy mentioning my book. We're going to talk a little bit about what I have been writing about for the last 10 years or so. I'm a very slow writer. But I did want to give my book away, and I thought what I could do is give it to somebody that wants it, if you want it, but also I want to give it to somebody that went to the sing-along thing last night at Victory Circle, because that was a whole thing. Yes? All right, there you go. Have fun. So as we get started, I want to ask you to think about something, kind of call back in your memory, and then I'm going to give you a moment to turn and share what comes to mind for you with somebody sitting next to you. Maybe if you don't know them, it'll be a good chance to introduce yourself. I want you to be thinking about some kind of award that you got, maybe when you were little, maybe when you were an adult, some kind of recognition. It could have been for something big, like you ran a marathon and you got a medal. It could be something small, your son gave you a #1 mom mug or whatever. It doesn't matter. It might be a trophy. Think back if you won a lot of trophies when you were young. It might be a brand new cell phone that rings in the middle of a message. Could be a certificate, a ribbon, whatever. Okay, can everybody think of something they have won or gotten an award? So turn next to you. I'll give you like a minute and tell about what comes to mind for you when you think of that reward. Okay, about 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I want to hear a little of what you said. I'm going to come out here because last time when I asked for you to say something, then I couldn't hear you, and then I made fun of somebody that had a cold, and then I felt bad. So, all right, what awards? Tell me somebody's award here.
Blue Ribbon Award.
Blue Ribbon Award? She's like, why you tell me? I told you that in confidence. Okay. What was the blue ribbon for? The best school in the nation? Okay. Little flex. Okay. What else? What about over here? Yeah?
Bizarre collection.
You got an award for the most bizarre collection. The question begs to be asked. What is the collection of?
Toilet paper all over Europe.
Toilet paper all over Europe. Fresh toilet paper. Okay. That is bizarre. Okay, what about over here? Something over here?
Best dad mug.
But you got a best dad mug? Yes. By one of your children. By one of your children. Okay. You didn't buy it yourself, because you could buy it yourself too. All right, any other ones real quick? Anything else? Did anybody run a marathon? Yeah, right here? You're like, yeah, whatever. I do that. I used to be really good at winning awards, in particular in an organization that I was in that was called Awana. I started in first grade, and I don't know if they still do this, but in first grade it was called Sparkies. And my first day there, I was given the red Sparky's vest. I brought a picture of myself as a first grader, my red vest. And you got there, and I remember that the day I showed up, they gave me the vest. I was official. I was a Sparky's. I was part of the group. And then what we proceeded to do throughout the years with Sparky's and then into Awana was there would be competitions, and there would be a lot of singing, and there would be the memorizing of the Bible verses. And this is where you got the awards. And you would put the awards all over your vest. I like to call it like your bling. Like you would earn your bling by memorizing the different Bible verses. And so ours was on Wednesday night. So Wednesday, from after school all the way till Sparky's, I would just cram as much Bible memorization as I could into my brain. And so then when it would come time where you got to say your verses, I would go up to Miss Jackie, and I would say all of them. I'd say, "For God so loved the world," boom, and then she would sign my thing. I'd say, "For the wages of sin is death," boom, she would sign it. I would say, "For by grace are ye saved," and she would sign it. We said ye because we were King James at my Sparky's, King James. So we had all the like these, the thous, the lest, not lust, but lest. Lust was in there too, but I don't remember learning those verses. And so we would get them all, and when you got 3 of Miss Jackie's signatures, then you got a jewel. And the jewel was going on a crown. You had a little plastic crown with little tiny holes for all the jewels. And Miss Jackie would get out her jewel kit. She'd open her little baggie and get out her jewel tweezers and get out her jewel glue. She'd stick it on there, and she would meticulously pop it right on there. And then you would do more verses, and you'd get more jewels. And if you filled up all the jewel spots, you know what you got? A whole other crown to start filling more jewels with. And you got patches. And then when I got into Awanas, you got bars with little dangly things and more patches and all the things. And my vest and my Awana shirt just dripped with bling. So much that I had amassed. And after 6 years, I rose to the pinnacle of Awanaism, and I earned the Timothy Award. And they gave me this plaque, and I would walk by, and people's mouths would fall open. There she goes. She's the best. She won the Timothy Award, and I dripped with decoration. And in my heart, I believed that God must be really impressed with me. And I left Awana over 30 years ago, but that drive to perform did not go away. It's as if I kind of started on this trajectory, not because of anything wrong with Awana. I mean, I think 80% of the Bible verses I know are because of Awana. But this trajectory, it kind of started early in my faith that said that the most important thing to God was that I be a good Christian. And if I did, that God would be really proud of me. And as a pastor, I get the privilege of speaking with a lot of people who come from all different sorts of backgrounds. And what I find is that most of us, are working really hard for God's approval and his acceptance and to feel like we're good enough. Even if you never had a literal Sparky's vest like I did, my guess is that you have some type of spiritual bling that you are decorating a spiritual vest with. You have some kind of way that you're keeping track of how good you're doing when it comes to your relationship with God. And specifically, I mean, are you doing enough? Are you being good enough at being good enough? On some level, I think there's something in all of us that's working really hard for God's approval, for his acceptance, because our need for acceptance, our need to belong and be accepted and to feel like we're good enough, it's actually one of the most basic core needs that all of us as humans have. There's just something that's ingrained in us to want and to need approval. And it starts when we're little. It starts with how our parents teach us the rules of life, what to do, what not to do, how to behave, how not to behave. So why? So that you will be accepted, so that you will fit in, so that you will follow the rules. This is sometimes what it is to be a parent, is to teach our kids those things. And so we were taught that. And then we got a little bit older and we went to school, and then it became our teachers' jobs to teach us what to do so that you can be approved. You know, it's funny because when my kids were growing up, they didn't start getting letter grades until 4th grade. I don't know if it's like that now. When I was little, those things started in like kindergarten. Like we're still traumatized from getting a C in reading when we were 5, you know, but there's this need to be accepted, to be approved, and then it just goes on from there. As we get older, we look for approval from our boyfriends or our girlfriends, from our coaches, from our group of friends, from our boss. Then when we get older, eventually from our spouse, and eventually from our mother-in-law. If she's here with you, don't look at her. On some level, we seek some sort of approval everywhere we go, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. Can you say that with me? It's exhausting. And it all comes from this one question in us deep down: am I good enough? This question that we spend most of our lives trying to get to the answer. Or maybe better put, am I enough? And if it wasn't bad enough that we're dealing with all of that when it comes to our lives and our jobs and our marriages and our adultness, it spills over into our relationship with God, right? Because we're doing all the Christian things and we're like, God, look at me. Look what I did for you. Are you proud of me? Did you see that? I hope you didn't see that, but did you see that? Aren't I doing such a good job? I hope you still like me. And it can be spiritually exhausting. And essentially, what we are trying to do is decorate our spiritual vest. Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, he gets this. He gets this thing in us, because it was in him too. And this is what he says in Galatians. I'm going to read this. We're going to put it up out of the Message. And it might be a different way I like sometimes to read different versions or different translations or versions so that you can kind of just get a different feel for it. So this is in the Message. And this is what Paul says early on in the book of Galatians, starting in chapter 2, verse 19. I tried keeping the rules and working my head off to please God, and it didn't work. So I quit being a lawman so that I could be God's man. Christ's life showed me how and enabled me to do it. I identified myself completely with him. Indeed, I have been crucified with Christ. My ego is no longer central. It's no longer important that I appear righteous before you or have your good opinion, and I am no longer driven to impress God. Christ lives in me. He goes on, is it not clear to you that to go back to the old rule-keeping, peer-pleasing religion would be an abandonment of everything personal and free in my relationship with God? I refuse to do that. To repudiate God's grace. If a living relationship with God could come by rule-keeping, then Christ died unnecessarily. Now, there is a lot in that to absorb. I hope that there were phrases in there that you heard that kind of resonated with you. And as you think about our tendency, your tendency to want approval, let's just kind of let these words sink in a little bit. Let's review some of the things that he said. He said, I tried keeping rules and working my head off, and it didn't work. Some of you feel that way right now. You are spiritually worn out. He says, my ego is no longer central. It's no longer important to me that I look good to you. Oh, that's freeing, isn't it? And then he goes even one step further and says, I am no longer driven to impress God. This is Paul talking. And then he says, if a living relationship with God could come by rule keeping, then why did Christ have to die? Paul wrote Galatians, this letter to the churches in Galatians, and he wrote it because they had gotten stuck in making their faith about performing for God, kind of following certain rituals and standards to impress God and to impress each other, and specifically to look better than each other. And for Paul, who in his life had many years of doing that, keeping all the rules, being perfectly religious, he finally comes to the realization that none of the rule keeping brought him any closer to God. And in fact, his spiritual performance that he was so focused on, it made it even harder for him to experience God's love for him. And so in Galatians, he's trying to convince them that the Jewish law that had been followed for generations was not actually the mark of a God follower. It is not what made them right with God. But in kind of an ironic twist, because Paul still uses the law, he points out that these rules were in place to actually point them to God. The rules were in place to point them away from the law to God. This is what I mean. He uses kind of a weird phrase in chapter 2, verse 19. If you're following along, you can go there. Galatians 2:19, this is what Paul says. Through the law, I died to the law so that I might live for Christ. Kind of a weird, confusing phrase. Through the law, I died to the law. Paul's being a little bit cryptic there. When he says the law, he's talking about the Jewish law that started with the 10 Commandments. But by the time Paul is writing this, there were over 600 Jewish laws to be followed. And these laws were held as the parameter for what it is to have a relationship with God. And in essence, they would say following these spiritual rules led you to a relationship with God as God's people. But Paul says, through the law, I died to the law. And what Paul is saying is that by trying to keep all those rules really hard, really good, and still failing at it, still seeing that he could not do it, is actually what taught him that the rules are a no-win situation. He would never be good enough. The rules, though, the law, are what point to Christ because the rules are impossible. And once we realize that the rule keeping is impossible, it makes us look somewhere else, which is where we find Jesus. Jesus, who did live a perfect life, who lived a righteous life, which just means that in every moment he was right with God. And then what grace does is it applies Jesus's righteousness to us who have not followed all the rules perfectly. Jesus met the requirements of the rules for us. And so Paul, who understood this more than anyone because he was a really good rule keeper, he was trained as a Pharisee, he was trained his whole life to follow, to understand, and to teach all the rules. He was the elite. And even he couldn't make it work. And he says in this passage, I finally get it. I finally get it. The point of the law is not to save us. It's to show us that we can't save ourselves. We must rely on God's grace. And so Paul experienced what many Jews back then experienced when they decided to follow Jesus and believe in him for their salvation. They had to let go of the law. That's what he means when he says, I died to the law. It's like the Jewish way of saying, you're dead to me. That's what he said to the law. He died to the law. And so what Paul wanted them to realize was that following the rules weren't going to save them. And in fact, all of the spiritual performing that came along as part of following the law had the potential to distract them from grace. Let's talk about grace for a second. One of the ways we can describe grace is this. It is the free, unearned love, forgiveness, and acceptance that God gives us through Jesus. And he gives it to us. This grace is a gift. Getting back to our Sparky story, the grace is the vest. I was just given the vest. I was in right away. That's what grace is. It's everything you need to be in. With grace, you have everything you need. Remember, I got that vest on day one. I was in. I was official. If I never memorized any verses, I would still be accepted because I had the vest. And it's exactly the same with grace. Grace is everything you need to be accepted through Jesus. Jesus died, and that death was supposed to be ours because of our sin. And then he overcame that death through the resurrection, and that alone is what gives us eternal life with God. But because we are people who struggle to feel accepted, remember, I said we are looking for approval everywhere we go, our whole lives. We think to ourselves, well, it can't really be that easy. It can't just be grace. How could God really accept me with no conditions other than that I believe that he does? And so instead of being profoundly moved by the depth of God's grace, we kind of just skip right past that part. And we move right on to so what do I need to do to be a good Christian? Tell me, so I can start doing it and start showing God that I'm worthy of this grace he has so freely given. And yet he says, you already have it. You have the vest. It's everything we need. But we start decorating it by doing things that good Christians are supposed to do, like we go to church and like we give of our finances, and maybe we have a small group in our home, and maybe we reach out and serve the homeless or other marginalized communities, which are all good things. Those are all good things. I am not telling you to stop doing those things. They're all good things. And I have this image of you going home and being like, it was so weird. I went to family camp at Mount Hermon, and the speaker told me to stop being such a good Christian. This is messing with me. I'm not saying to stop doing those things, but what I am saying is that until you separate all those good things you do from having anything to do with why or how God accepts you, then you are diminishing your experience of God's grace. If there's any nugget in your mind that the good stuff you are doing is impressing God or giving you some kind of spiritual credit or spiritual advantage, or it's proving you to be a better Christian than somebody else you know, then you're missing out on grace. Once you allow yourself to believe that when you've received God's grace, that he accepts you, even if you never did another good thing. And I'll ante up, even if you only ever did bad things from then on out. Do you really believe that his grace is big enough, that it is free enough, that you will still be accepted through Jesus no matter what? Once you get to say, yes, I can believe that, that's when you'll begin to understand the abundant and merciful and incredibly generous gift of grace that God offers us. See, we've got to realize that grace is totally the work of God. It's not on us. And Scripture actually shows us that was his plan. Even when the law was first given, way before the 10 Commandments, way back to the time of Abraham, the Bible shows us that God, he designed salvation to be God doing the work and us believing by faith that he did it. Let me show you what I mean. One of the things things that Paul likes to do in Galatians is he likes to make a lot of references to the Old Testament. He references Old Testament characters, Old Testament stories, maybe phrases out of the prophets, stuff like that. And when he does, his readers, who many of them had a Jewish background, his readers read that and they get it. Like they totally get the reference. He can just say one little thing, and to them, it brings to mind the rest of the context that Paul's saying, but he doesn't write it in there because they don't need it. They already know. But for us, a lot of it we miss because we don't know. It gets a little lost in translation. So there is this one reference that Paul makes, and it's so short. It's super short. You might just gloss right over it, but it's so critical to understand that everything we experience in God must be grounded in our belief that God is the doer and we are the receiver of the gift. What grace asks of us is simply that we believe it. All right, this is the line that Paul writes. I'm going to read this in Galatians 3, 8, and 9. Scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announced the gospel in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. So those who rely on faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. All right, so he says all nations will be blessed by you. Abraham was a man of faith. Okay, we get it. Faith, Abraham. It's not that earth-shattering, like we've kind of heard that before. We will be blessed if we have faith, just like Abraham was. But when the Galatian readers read this, especially the Jewish ones, when they read this line, all nations will be blessed through you, they immediately recall this episode out of Abraham's life. Generations before Jesus, before David, before Moses, so before the law, because the law came with Moses, all the way back to Abraham, the father of their whole nation. He had a mystical experience of God that's recorded in Genesis 15. And Paul is quoting Old Testament to them in the churches in Galatia. He's quoting the Old Testament, and he's referring to this episode in Genesis when he says, all nations will be blessed through you. And he did that to remind those readers that even from the very beginning, even before Jesus, a relationship with God was about faith, not doing. Here's what happened. Abraham was in a conversation with God, and Abraham was pointing out to God that it seemed like he was a little slow on delivering his promise. He had made some promises to Abraham that had to do with land and people, a nation and land. And so he pointed out to God, I don't have the people because I haven't had a son yet. So when's that going to happen? And then he points out that I don't have the land because everywhere we go, the land is already occupied. So he's struggling with God. You said you were going to do this and you're not doing it. You've made a promise. You've made a covenant. And then after that, this really weird thing happens. And I'm going to tell you about that really weird thing, and it is weird, but back then it wasn't really that weird because when you're doing a lot of weird things like they did back then, you do them a lot and they seem less weird. So we look at it and it's weird, but for them it was normal. So I'm going to tell you about this weird thing. It's going to feel weird, but before I show you that, let me explain the weird thing that this weird thing comes from. Tracking? Okay, all right, here we go. So, in the ancient culture, one of the ways that two people or two leaders would make a covenant with each other is they would do this weird thing that was sort of a choreographed thing that involved animals. Now, I am going to need some volunteers for this, but I promise I won't make you squeal or jump up and down like I did on Monday. So I just need 8 people. So can you just be my friends and 8 people come up here? All you have to be able to do is stand, and I will call on you if you don't come. Yep, there we go. Okay, all right, we got this. I need 8 of you. All right, I need some men. Come on, I see all women. Let's get a couple men up here. Okay, yep, there we go. We have 1. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1 more. There we go. Thank you, sir. All right. Okay, so what's going to happen? Okay, let's see. You guys, You guys come over here. You stay there for a second. You guys come over here. All right. You two are going to be a pair, and you need to just think of an animal that you're going to be, okay? And then you guys, you think of an animal you're going to be. Then you come over here. Your partner's with her. You think of the animal that you're going to be. Yeah, for those that were at the music circle, we did E-I-E-I-O, and he just let people say like whatever was on the farm, and we had a space pig and an earth pig, just so you know. We had both. All right, you got your animals? Okay, so you guys, you come right on up here. Your animal right here. Okay, and what animal are you? Horse, all right. And then you guys come right here behind them. What animal are you?
Pig now. We were going to be a horse, but...
Oh, you know what? Way to pivot. All right, and then you guys come right behind here. What are you?
We were going to be a horse too.
So many horses. Hippo. Okay, so we have the OG horse that called horse first. Then we've got pig. Then we've got hippo. Okay, so what happens in this ritual is you guys stand together, is you line up 3 animals. There's sometimes some bonus animals, but the weird stuff doesn't happen with them as much. And then what they do is they cut them in half. So we're going to just slice you guys in half. There you go. So now instead of an animal, you're just a half a carcass. Okay, there we go. All right, so we have our 2. We won't make you designate who's the rear end and who's the head, but this is the cut in half horse, okay? This is the pig, and this is the hippo. Okay, so then what happens? So these 2 are the ones that are going to make the covenant. So the weird thing that they do is they walk between the cut in half animals that are laying on the ground, okay? So just go ahead and come back here behind this half of the hippo here, and you come over here, okay? All right, then you guys, you're gonna make this covenant by walking through. So let's just watch this promise be made. Super creepy, yeah. And the idea of it is as they go, what they are saying in this choreography is, may it be to me as these animals if I do not fulfill my side of the covenant, okay? So this is saying, I will be like these animals if I fail on my end of the covenant, okay? All right, so that's the original weird covenant practice. Now, what they refer to is when this happened with Abraham. So Abraham's in this conversation with God, and what happens is Abraham falls into a deep sleep. So what we're going to do is you guys are going to come over here now, and we're going to change your characters for a second. We're going to change your animals because it was a cow and a ram and a goat, but they were still cut in half. And so we have God and Abraham over here, and they're the ones that are making a covenant. And God is saying, I've made this covenant with you that you will be my people, okay? And Abraham, you be Abraham. Abraham falls into a deep sleep. You don't have to lay down if you don't want. Okay, you can. Okay, thank you. Good. Take a little nap. It's good. It's really good. Abraham falls into a deep sleep, and he has this vision where God says to him, more about this covenant. And then, do you have your phone on you by any chance? It's right there. Okay, go get your phone. Because what happens is he imagines in his dream, in this vision that he has while he falls into this deep sleep, that God begins to walk through these animals that are on the ground. And he imagines God as a smoking fire pot or a torch. Can you just turn your flashlight on your phone? That's as good as we're going to get for an ancient torch. Okay, just hold that up. You're going to be God. Just come over here. Okay, are you with me? Okay, so Abraham's asleep. He's having this vision, and God walks through exactly like that, you guys. Okay. But you can put that down, thank you. All right, we got it? So God walks through. And actually, you guys have been great. You can sit down. Let's thank our dead animals and our characters. Thank you, Abraham. You good? Okay. Now, you might have noticed something different in the way that this covenant happened, this ritual happened in the vision. Because in a normal covenant, both parties would walk through. So both parties are saying, if I do not hold up my end of this relational covenant that we're making together, may it be to me as these animals are. But in the vision, in his dream, in his deep sleep, what Abraham saw was only God walking through. And what that meant was God saying, if I don't keep my end of the relational covenant, may it be to me. But Abraham, if you don't keep your end of the covenant, may it be to me. I will pay like this. And 2,000 years later, he did. So all of this comes to mind when the Galatian readers read this simple phrase that says, all nations will be blessed by you. And what Paul is doing there is he is urging them, do not make the mistake that you can add anything to what I've done. Do not make the mistake that the good things that you are doing, an effort to please me, an effort to be good, an effort to try to follow, if you think any of them add to my gift of grace, you're not only wrong, but you're missing out on receiving the depth of what grace really is. I want to ask you this morning to maybe consider what might you be doing in your spiritual life that is decorating the vest, where you're trying to add to what Jesus did. And could it be that he's inviting you to stop doing those things? Maybe to change the way you do those things? The undecorating has to start one by one. Sometimes it's about expectations that you have on yourself or you have on other people. Sometimes it's spiritual scorekeeping where you keep track of what you've been doing and you also keep track of the ways that you've failed. And grace answers all of that. Sometimes we evaluate how we're doing by how close we feel to God, as if our connection with God through Jesus is based on how we feel in any given day. Sometimes we evaluate how much we feel like we're glorifying God. I had a woman come up to me at church and she just said, I just feel like I'm not glorifying God enough, which I think can be a helpful question to ask, but I sensed in her that there was a compulsion, that she felt that she needed to earn it, that she needed to sort of even the score on what God had given her. And I wonder if, in a kind of way, that's a dangerous question to be asking. How can I glorify God more before fully embracing grace that says, no matter how much good you do, and no matter how much bad you do, grace, because it's based on God, does not change. And then when we do good, it is motivated out of utter freedom to do it out of a response to his love instead of any kind of compulsion or trying to prove ourselves or trying to impress God. If we could just get our minds around that, what would change in your life if you really believed that grace was free? If you really believed that you are already fully accepted, I think it would change everything. Jeremy mentioned a couple days ago that I used to be an improviser in Las Vegas. And we moved there when my daughter was 3 months old because we were like, where do we want to raise our family? I know, Vegas. And so we moved to Las Vegas, and I became part of this show that was with an organization there called The Second City. And our show was called Scriptless because it was fully improvised. There was no script. And it was kind of like Whose Line Is It Anyway? If anybody remembers that show. This is called short form improvisation, where you would get a suggestion out of the audience, and then you would have to incorporate it into a scene or a game or a song or whatever. And it was colorful. I mean, as you can imagine, we were at the Flamingo. Our show was at about 10 p.m. That crowd had a lot of fun suggestions when we asked them for ideas. But here's what I want you to know about improvisation. The first book I wrote was actually about how these tenets of improvisation really taught me a lot about my life with God. Because there's these kind of rules of improvisation. And one of them is that everything you give is accepted. So improv is ensemble. So you don't do it by yourself. It's always with an ensemble. So you work together. And what that means is that whatever I bring to the stage, if I say that I am a horse and also a horse and also another horse, then my teammates, my castmates will accept that. Yes, you are a horse. If I say we're all on a forest moon of space, yes, that is. And so what that means for you as the performer is you have so much freedom. Because you know that no matter what you do, even if it's a bad idea, even if it is not funny, you know what's going to happen? You're going to be accepted. And that's what the feeling was in this group. And it just makes me think if a group of improvisers on the Las Vegas stage could accept people that way, how much more does our God accept us? That is how deep his love goes for you. Today, as you go, I want you to be thinking about what does undecorating the vest look like for you? I had a man come up to me at church just last week, and he said, Andrea, I'm reading your book, and I get it. I get the thing about the vest. And I, you know, I love serving here at church. You know, I'm an usher. I'm part of the men's group, and I love it. I love it. I love it. He goes, how do I know if I'm decorating the vest? And I said, yeah, Don, it's a really good question. We just stared at each other for a minute. And then he goes, oh, I have to answer it, huh? Yeah, Don, only you can answer it. I trust God that he is powerful enough that his spirit in you will lead you to discern for you what you're doing that needs to be undone. And maybe it's just for a season. Maybe it's for a long time. I know for me, I spent probably the first 4 decades of my life working really hard to be a good Christian. And I mean, I'd like to think I still got some fruit happening, but something changes when the compulsion to do it out of anything other than a total return of God's love. Then I don't think that's what God had in mind. And I think you may be missing a big, deep, wonderful, abundant part of God's grace. Let's pray. Father, I do trust that you speak, that you work. God, I ask that you would help everyone here to have room to have this conversation with you in the way that they need to. God, that any shame or guilt that is driving them would be put to death. God, that any judgment that they have over others who aren't quite as good at being a Christian as they are would be put to death. God, that we would come just purely grateful that you have done everything. We don't deserve it, but we choose to receive it. Help us to receive it more fully as we lay down all the good things to you. In Jesus' name, amen.